Meloni just made a move that Brussels did not see coming, and the silence that followed in the corridors of the Berlaymont building was heavier than any press conference could capture. It did not arrive as a dramatic speech or a fiery declaration. It arrived as a policy shift, framed in technical language, filed through procedural channels, and justified under treaty interpretation. That subtlety made it far more dangerous than open rebellion ever could. Italy had formally notified the European Commission that it would reinterpret enforcement conditions attached to certain fiscal and migration mechanisms tied to EU funding frameworks. On the surface, the wording appeared procedural. It cited subsidiarity. It referenced constitutional balance. It emphasized national parliamentary sovereignty within the European project. But within Brussels, officials immediately understood what this meant. A founding member state had just tested the outer edge of EU authority. Giorgia Meloni did not announce an exit. She did not threaten the euro. She did not attack the European Union directly. Instead, she positioned Italy as fully committed to Europe while rejecting what she described as bureaucratic overreach in areas that directly affect national governance. That distinction was strategic. By staying inside the system while challenging its enforcement architecture, she forced Brussels into a dilemma without triggering automatic legal retaliation. The European Union's strength does not rest on dramatic power displays. It rests on incremental compliance. Member states follow regulatory frameworks, financial conditions, and harmonized directives not because of visible force, but because the system has historically functioned with predictability. If a major state begins redefining the interpretation of compliance boundaries, that predictability fractures. Italy is not a peripheral state that can be pressured without consequence. It is the third largest economy in the Eurozone. Its public debt is significant. Its bond markets are deeply intertwined with the stability of the European Central Bank's monetary policy architecture. Any confrontation with Italy carries systemic risk. Brussels convened emergency consultations within hours. Legal teams reviewed treaty language. Financial analysts assessed potential bond spread reactions. Political advisors evaluated messaging strategies. The key question was simple but profound. How do you enforce compliance against a state that has not technically broken the rules but has stretched them to their interpretive limit? Financial markets reacted cautiously but did not panic. Italian bond yields ticked upward slightly, reflecting uncertainty rather than collapse. Investors seemed to anticipate negotiation rather than rupture. That market calm emboldened Rome. Meloni's approval ratings edged upward domestically as her stance was framed as a defense of Italian sovereignty within Europe rather than against it. The migration dimension amplified the tension. Italy has long argued that it carries disproportionate responsibility for Mediterranean migration flows. EU redistribution mechanisms have been politically sensitive. By tying reinterpretation to migration-linked conditionality, Meloni tapped into a deeply emotional domestic issue while forcing Brussels to confront its burden-sharing limitations. Germany urged caution. Berlin understood that economic confrontation with Italy would ripple across the Eurozone. France evaluated whether strong enforcement would preserve institutional credibility or accelerate nationalist backlash. Eastern European governments watched carefully, some privately admiring the maneuver. If Italy succeeded, it would signal that reinterpretation is possible without catastrophic retaliation. Meloni's strategy rested on timing. Europe's growth was stagnating. Energy prices remained volatile. Public frustration towards centralized governance had been rising across multiple member states. European Parliament elections loomed on the horizon. The political environment was primed for sovereignty narratives. By framing her move as constitutional recalibration rather than confrontation, she avoided isolation. She repeatedly emphasized that Italy remains committed to the European project. The argument was not exit. The argument was balance. Balance is difficult to attack politically. Brussels initially responded with procedural language. A review process was announced. Technical consultations would take place. Legal assessments would evaluate alignment with treaty obligations. This bought time. Time is often Brussels' most effective instrument, but time also creates space for narratives to harden. Italian media amplified the theme of national dignity. Sovereignty-focused movements across Europe began referencing Rome's stance. Commentators asked whether the era of unquestioned compliance had ended. The debate was no longer confined to fiscal clauses. It was about authority distribution inside the European Union. Authority within the EU is mathematical. 27 member states, weighted voting mechanisms, qualified majorities. If alignment shifts across even a handful of capitals, enforcement capacity weakens. Meloni's maneuver signaled that alignment is fluid. Behind closed doors, Commission strategists drafted scenario models. One scenario assumed Italy would compromise after symbolic resistance. Another predicted partial concession, allowing Rome to claim political victory. A more dangerous scenario envisioned escalating defiance, triggering funding suspensions and market instability. stability. The most destabilizing scenario involved multiple states coalescing around reinterpretation of centralized mechanisms. The Eurozone's structural stability hovered in the background. The European Central Bank possessed tools to calm bond markets, but reliance on monetary intervention carries political cost. Monetary stability cannot permanently mask institutional fragmentation. International observers paid attention. Washington evaluated whether internal EU strain would complicate transatlantic coordination. Moscow analyzed whether fragmentation could weaken sanctions cohesion. Beijing considered whether recalibration might open economic opportunity. Weeks passed without immediate punitive action. The absence of retaliation became politically significant. In Rome, it was framed as proof that Italy had acted within legal bounds. In Brussels, it was described as careful deliberation, but perception favored momentum. Meloni reinforced her narrative. Italy does not reject Europe. Italy rejects automatic centralization beyond treaty intent. That message resonated beyond Italian borders. Public opinion polls in several EU states indicated growing support for re-examining centralized enforcement frameworks. The conversation had moved from fringe to mainstream. Brussels faced a strategic paradox. Aggressive enforcement risked validating claims of bureaucratic overreach. Passivity risked institutional erosion. The Commission sought calibrated response, technical clarification, limited procedural pressure, and diplomatic engagement. Negotiations intensified quietly. Compromise formulas were explored, adjusted compliance schedules, refined migration participation frameworks, interpretive guidance clarifying fiscal conditions without public humiliation. But compromise itself carries precedent. If Italy secured concessions, others would notice. The deeper struggle was philosophical. The European Union evolved through crisis. Sovereign debt turmoil expanded fiscal oversight. Pandemic emergency expanded centralized procurement. War expanded defense coordination. Each crisis left institutional residue. Now the question was whether residue becomes permanence. Meloni's move forced the Union to confront that question publicly. The coming months would determine whether this episode becomes footnote or inflection point. But one thing was already clear. Brussels was not omnipotent. Its authority depended on cohesion. Cohesion depends on political will. Political will fluctuates. Meloni understood that leverage. She did not break the system, she bent it. And systems that bend under internal pressure must either recalibrate or fracture. The recalibration did not unfold in headlines. It unfolded in quiet rooms where language was dissected word by word and commas carried strategic weight. Brussels understood that direct confrontation with Rome could ignite forces far beyond fiscal interpretation. Italy's economy was too large, its political symbolism too significant. The European Union could not afford a repeat of the existential tremors that accompanied the British referendum years earlier. Yet the lesson of that era lingered in institutional memory. Underestimating domestic political momentum can fracture continental architecture. Meloni's leverage expanded precisely because she did not escalate emotionally. She maintained composure, reiterated commitment to Europe, and framed every move as defensive rather than aggressive. By refusing the optics of rebellion, she denied Brussels the narrative of disciplinary enforcement. Enforcement requires clear violation. She operated within interpretive elasticity. Inside the European Commission, divisions surfaced quietly. Some officials argued that allowing reinterpretation without firm response would encourage centrifugal tendencies. Others warned that overly rigid enforcement could catalyze a sovereignty wave across multiple capitals. The Commission's power rests not only on treaty text, but on the perception that it can harmonize competing national interests without appearing coercive. Italy's domestic political environment strengthened Meloni's position. Economic stagnation across parts of Europe had amplified voter fatigue with distant decision-making. Energy prices had strained households. Migration pressures remained visible in coastal regions. By tying her move to tangible domestic concerns, she transformed abstract treaty debates into kitchen-table issues. German leadership faced its own constraints. Berlin had long championed fiscal discipline and structural oversight within the Eurozone, yet Germany's own economic slowdown limited its appetite for destabilizing confrontation. France balanced strategic autonomy rhetoric with commitment to European cohesion. Neither capital desired escalation, but neither wanted to signal weakness. As negotiations continued behind closed doors, the European Central Bank monitored Italian bond spreads carefully. Markets were sending mixed signals. Volatility remained contained, suggesting investors believed in eventual compromise. But sustained uncertainty could alter that calculus quickly. In Eastern Europe, reactions were nuanced. Some governments sympathetic to sovereignty narratives observed with interest. Others, reliant on EU funding and wary of instability near Russia's borders, preferred stability over reinterpretation. The fragmentation of perspectives revealed the complexity of coalition arithmetic within the Union. Meloni's broader objective extended beyond immediate policy adjustments. She sought to redefine the boundaries of central authority within the EU without triggering expulsion or isolation. That balancing act required precision. Too much defiance could provoke funding suspension mechanisms. Too little firmness could dissolve political credibility at home. Public discourse across Europe intensified. Commentators debated whether the EU had drifted toward technocratic consolidation, disconnected from national electorates. Others argued that central coordination remained essential in an era of geopolitical rivalry. The tension between efficiency and accountability became central. The Commission explored procedural responses that would preserve authority while offering Rome a face-saving pathway. Technical committees proposed clarifying language around conditionality triggers. Migration burden-sharing formulas were revisited with flexibility. Fiscal monitoring schedules were discussed with room for interpretive nuance. Every concession risked precedent. Every refusal risked escalation. The standoff illuminated a deeper structural truth. The EU's supranational framework functions through voluntary pooling of sovereignty. That pooling requires continuous consent. Consent is dynamic, influenced by domestic politics, economic cycles, and leadership style. Meloni had tapped into a moment when consent felt negotiable. International observers began recalibrating their assessments of European cohesion. Washington noted that internal recalibration might slow certain regulatory initiatives. Moscow analyzed whether cracks could widen under sustained pressure. Beijing evaluated whether shifting internal balances might open economic corridors. Despite speculation, no dramatic rupture occurred. No emergency summit declared crisis. Instead, the confrontation evolved into protracted negotiation. Rome maintained its interpretive stance. Brussels maintained review processes. Behind the scenes, both sides sought an outcome that avoided humiliation. In financial terms, stability persisted. Italian bond spreads widened modestly, but did not spiral. The ECB's implicit backstop reassured markets that systemic collapse remained unlikely. Politically, however, the episode reshaped expectations. Sovereignty debates that once lingered at the edges now occupied mainstream discussion. Parliamentarians in several states began examining the scope of EU-level enforcement mechanisms. Calls for clearer subsidiarity boundaries increased. Meloni's approval ratings at home reflected validation. She appeared as a leader capable of confronting Brussels without triggering economic disaster. That perception strengthened her domestic mandate. The Commission adjusted its communication strategy. It emphasized partnership rather than enforcement. It highlighted treaty flexibility while reaffirming commitment to cohesion. This recalibration signaled that authority within the EU is relational, not absolute. Months passed and incremental compromises emerged. Italy agreed to phased adjustments in migration participation. Brussels clarified fiscal reporting intervals without imposing punitive measures. Both sides declared commitment to European unity. On the surface, stability prevailed. Beneath the surface, equilibrium had shifted. Member states recognized that interpretive negotiation is possible under the right political conditions. The Commission recognized that enforcement requires consensus more than compulsion. The long-term implications extended beyond Italy. The episode demonstrated that large member states possess leverage when they combine legal precision with political timing. Smaller states observed that precedent carefully. European integration has always advanced through tension. The sovereign debt crisis expanded fiscal coordination. Brexit prompted institutional introspection. Pandemic response accelerated joint borrowing mechanisms. Each episode left institutional residue. Meloni's maneuver left a different kind of residue, recalibrated expectations. Expectations influence future negotiations. The next time Brussels proposes enforcement-linked reforms, capitals will remember Rome's precedent. They will evaluate not only treaty text but political timing. In geopolitics, power is rarely about immediate victory. It is about shaping boundaries. Meloni did not dismantle the European Union. She did not withdraw Italy from its commitments. She did not trigger financial collapse. She redrew the line subtly. The line between centralized authority and national discretion became more visible. Visibility alters behavior. Behavior alters institutions. As Europe moved forward, the memory of that recalibration lingered. Commission proposals incorporated more explicit sunset clauses. Consultation periods lengthened strengthened modestly. Migration frameworks gained incremental flexibility. None of these adjustments appeared revolutionary in isolation. Collectively, they signaled adaptation. The European Union remained intact, but its architecture had flexed under internal pressure. Flexibility prevented fracture. Meloni's shocking move ultimately revealed that Brussels is powerful, but not omnipotent. Its strength derives from consensus and economic interdependence. When a major state asserts calibrated defiance, the system must respond through negotiation rather than decree. The episode became a case study in contemporary European politics, sovereignty assertion within integration. Italy's position stabilized. Brussels preserved authority through adjustment. Markets remained calm. The euro endured. But the balance between center and nation had shifted incrementally. In the years that followed, analysts would look back at this moment as an inflection point, not because of dramatic collapse, but because of quiet recalibration. Meloni had tested the system had bent, and Europe continued forward, changed not by rupture, but by recognition that power within the Union is negotiated continuously, never permanently settled.